All right, now we're set up. So again, apologies for the delay getting started. That took a lot of class. Yeah.
About your question earlier.
Yeah.
It's not related to the economics, it's more related to free to play, but I guess you could go over dark patterns.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, good to know, good to think about. I think that's certainly valid.
I would definitely be interested in carrying out dark patterns.
Okay. Yeah. So there's certainly plenty of balance related content to go over. If we're excited about that, we'll certainly continue in that direction. I have most of the quarter planned out. So let's actually talk now about open and closed economies. So to give a bit of a recap, I guess I wanted to make this announcement before I get started. Half the people were in here for it, but there was instructor permission required on part 2 of this course. So if anyone has any issues registering for part 2, I sent the course list on to Jane, and she should be going through this entire course list and just giving everyone the instructor permission they need to register for part 2 of this course. If you run into any issues with that, please just reach out to her. If you're getting a strange prerequisite, I've heard of that. If you're getting anything else that's preventing you from registering for part 2, you shouldn't. You're in the class. You will be in the class. It's just a matter of manipulating the system and getting you in there. So reach out to me, reach out to Jane if you have any issues getting in the class. You should be able to get in. The other thing, I guess, is the announcement of I will be shifting the due date this week from Sunday to Monday based on a couple of requests for the chapters. So chapters will be due Monday of next week, and then we'll be resuming our usual Sunday evening from there. I've heard and thought and agree with the fact that there's an exam this week, and it was a bit of a short week. If you took this last Monday to work on the last hours that were due, you have fewer days with an exam in there. It'd be easier to focus on the exam, add an extra day this time, and then get back into a regular pattern. So I will change that due date as soon as I remember it. If I don't, someone sent me an angry email. I intend for the due date for the next chapters to be Monday. Yeah.
I think the one after that's the last 3, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll have that due the following Sunday, and then we will shift focus from hours to writing a final paper.
3 about like mobile development.
Yeah, there's not a lot you can do with the last 3. It's freedom for your own information, write about how it would be useful or could be useful, although we will not be doing that in this class. And then it's okay to skip that section or just write it very quick. It will be less relevant for the upcoming game publishing that we're doing next quarter. I think that's all the announcements that I meant to make. I think. All right, actually getting into it now. Open and closed economies. Also, for people on Zoom, since this is on my local machine instead of on the podium, that unfortunately means that I cannot see chat as easily. It's not on a separate screen that just pops up that I've set it to. So if you have something important to say, I don't know how you're going to get my attention. I'm sorry. Hopefully this is fixed soon. So what are open and closed economies? What are these systems? So an open system means that the actual internal part can be influenced by something outside of the system. So it's an open system. Something outside of the system can affect the system. Makes sense? A closed system just means that the system is entirely self-contained. Nothing from the outside can affect the internal state of a closed system. So thinking about the economy types that we've talked about, which ones are open? Which ones are closed? Thoughts on that? WoW's an open system. Why? Yeah, something outside of that system, something like an auction house that could involve real money, could involve something that is outside of the scope of the game can be used to affect the balance of the trade system inside. Yeah.
Genshin Impact is open because it's gacha, and the premium currency can be used to buy pulls for actual characters that they each have their own like style and
Would single player games that have like significant mod support and a lot of mods count as open?
Depends on what the mods are doing. If the mods allow the system to be affected from outside. So can players play the game? One player plays it modded, one player plays it not modded. And the economy in the modded version is different from the economy in the regular version. If that's the case, then I would argue that it's an open system. Because anyone can install those mods and then log into the game, and the game's mechanics have changed. But in a regular single player game where everything is designer produced, then that's a pretty closed system. There's nothing you can do to affect that except to play the game and engage with the trading system. So to make a joke and to make this fun, the next time you play some kind of board game, allow the exchange of real money for something in the game.
I had 100% swindle my roommates.
I can. Compass denies me this.
Right? But it will give you a sense of what changes when you take what's supposed to be a closed economy and you turn it into an open economy. How do people now change with proportion? How do they view the rules differently? How do they act differently in the game when suddenly real money transactions are allowed in the game? How much money are people willing to give up for an advantage in this board game? Maybe small amounts of money, but probably not a ton. But when it really gets competitive and you dig into, this is win or lose time, right at the end of the game, how much money are people willing to spend for an advantage? Kind of a curious question. You'll figure out who your richest friends are by doing this too. Whether you take advantage of that is up to you or not. So the detriment to this is you'll probably lose if you do this, the game and possibly the friends you're playing with. But the benefit is profit. So I don't know. I just felt like writing a joke at this stage.
It's like if you're playing Settlers of Catan, you say, well, you know, anyone, if you pay me $10, you know, I'll give
Yeah,
you-
exactly.
give me my resources.
Yeah.
At some point, people are gonna be like, you know, no, that's all right. If you really want the money, man, or if you really want to win this game, but by all means, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So throw away your sense of self-competition and replace it with your desire for profit. And well, there you go. You're known among your entire friend group as that unethical guy. So of course, closed systems are easier to design and balance because nothing from the outside is going to have an effect. When there is something from the outside, you can't always interpret or assume what is coming. You have to make some assumptions about how the economics are going to work, how it's going to affect your market prices. So you have to balance for unknowns. Whereas with a closed system, you can design everything. And yes, there are lots of difficult interrelated mechanics that affect your system, but it's all contained, and you, as the developer, you have control over every little knob and dial and tweak. In an open system, you do not have that. So you don't have control over full control over the economy, and you have to monitor it and make changes to it if it's in an unhealthy state. So let's zoom in on an open economy and figure out what can you do about it. How do you allow people to pay for in-game benefits when players are going to spend a bunch of different amounts of money? So you could, on one hand, limit spending. This is what's done in competitive poker. You have some number of chips. It doesn't matter how wealthy you actually are. If you're going to compete in competitive poker, you have a limit on the amount that you put into the pot and how many chips you walk away with to play in an invitational or a tournament. And that way everyone is on equal grounds, and the people who come up to the top are the most skilled players, not just those who have the most money. Another option is limiting the total amount of power. So spending lets you get to a power ceiling faster, but someone who is a free-to-play player can still reach that power ceiling and be competitive with people who paid for the in-game benefits, but maybe it takes more game time, more grinding. You can do what's called providing competitive gates. So you use some kind of ranking or matchmaking algorithm, and you pit players of a particular power level against each other. And that way, as you get more powerful, so do your opponents. And every game feels fair and balanced because you're playing with people who are at about that same power level. Note that that doesn't necessarily take into account how long the players have been playing the game. So even if your characters have an equal power level, if one player has been a free-to-play player who's been getting there over the course of 2 years, they probably have more game experience and might be more skilled at actually playing the game than someone who just spent money yesterday and got to that same point. On the other hand, if you pay for a significant advantage and you're at a power level that a free-to-play player just can't get to, then you're pitted against other people who have paid for that same benefit. So you create two different economies, kind of the free-to-play economy and the pay-to-win economy. And that can work as well. You also have what a lot of free-to-play games do, survival of the richest. You just straight up don't try to balance it for everyone. So you balance it for those who are willing to pay, and they become more powerful than those who don't pay. And then whatever happens to those who don't pay happens. You're not actively developing for that or care about it. So thinking about it, when would each of these strategies work and why would they be effective? Any thoughts on where you would want to apply any of these ideas? Yeah.
Limiting power would be good for prestige economy,
Mhm.
because that way, like, yeah, you can have more options, ways to get power, but you're still gonna have to play the game.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So for prestige items that don't actually affect the gameplay, you could just, if it did affect the gameplay and they affect the gameplay to a limited extent that other players can also get to. Yeah, sure.
I mean, you could possibly like leverage survival of the richest, like if you had some kind of like player versus player game. And you let people buy like gear and equipment or like power ups or something like that to give them the competitive edge. And then you just like advertise that to players that get killed by them. Like whenever they get killed,
Yeah.
you show them like the fancy gear that they have or like the power ups. And then, you know,
Oh,
that kind of manipulates people into wanting to buy that as well.
yeah. Especially if right after being killed by someone with particular gear, they see that gear in the store
Mhm.
at a price point that is AI determined, that is right on the border of what you're willing to spend or not. Yeah, right? Where is the limit of where you can take this? That's a great ethical question of where is that boundary between ethical and unethical?
Or is the legal bounds allowed?
That is one interpretation.
Like, IF CEO loses job because he like screwed over his plan in EVE Online or something.
Yeah. These things happen and have real world consequences. So what do we do about player trades in open economies? So if players can spend money for some kind of premium item, and that premium item can be traded between players, then we also have to consider how this propagates and affects the rest of the economy. A lot of multiplayer games are balanced like this. People can pay for some benefit, but then that benefit is tradable for some currency that everyone can acquire. And that way you can inject value into the economy via money, but then free-to-play players can also farm up enough currency to be able to buy that premium item from the person who spent money on it. So everyone is technically, in terms of their ceiling, on equal footing, but people who are willing to pay can get an instant benefit, and people who aren't paying have to grind for that same benefit. So you end up with a secondary market. So players end up trading in-game items for money, which is how that enters the system, that those premium items enter the system, and you can end up affecting the game's revenue stream. So it has to now compete with this player-driven market. So if I'm playing a game and I can buy this premium currency, and then I can do something with that, I can now sell some items outside of the game for real world money as well. If I price it less than the game would to be able to acquire that same value, then suddenly someone who's considering purchasing from the game has a secondary consideration of, should I buy this from the game or should I buy this from another player who's selling it for real money? And if that's the case, if a player can make that decision, then you would take some sale that would have happened within the game system that would have been money for you, the designer, and that is now lost. It's traded from another player rather than from the game. Sometimes, if that leads to a larger player base, because players can now do that, then it might be ideal. Maybe it actually affects your bottom line in a positive way by allowing that. On the other hand, it may affect it in a negative way, but it's something you should collect data on to figure out how you should handle it. So if players can sell items cheaper than the cost to acquire from an in-game store, then yeah, game can lose potential income from that transaction. It's the same argument that is used in piracy, although of course that's blown way out of proportion in terms of piracy, because there's this assumption legally that if you pirate something, then you would have purchased it. And I do not think that is always true. So every instance of piracy is not necessarily a lost transaction or lost profit. And if you ever see or hear cumulative metrics that say this company lost this much money from this amount of piracy, it's probably significantly less than that. Because that same person, if they had the money for it, would have spent the money for it, but they don't have the money for it. So they have some other place where that money needs to go, and it becomes, do I pirate it or not, which is not a lost transaction. I'm not arguing for piracy when I say this, but I just think that a lot of the statistics around piracy are overblown because they're not considering it from the chair of the person doing the piracy. They're not.
That piracy's not a victimless crime.
You wouldn't download a car.
I absolutely would download a car.
Have you seen how expensive those things are?
They're about to be more expensive. Without getting into politics, they're about to be more expensive. So as the designer, what do you have control of? If you just prohibit the exchange of in-game items for real money, then in your terms of service, you have reasons to ban people who do engage in it, and you're sending a message that this is not an intended part of this game economy. You should not be able to purchase these items from outside of the game system. But then, of course, you have to enforce that, because people will attempt to circumvent that and still sell things outside of the game if you allow for the exchange of the trading of items. Whenever you have the trading of items, you open the floodgates to trading those items for real money. So, of course, how do we enforce the prohibit the exchange of in-game items? You either straight up say trade isn't allowed, or you have to collect some kind of data to determine when are transactions meaningful transactions versus junk transactions. So let's say a transaction takes place outside the scope of a game where I pay someone $20 for an in-game item. Then I pull a junk item out of my stash and I trade it to them for this valuable item. Is there a way to determine that this transaction was not agreed upon within the game, but it was agreed upon externally as an exchange of money? How do you separate the new player who just doesn't know the value of their item from someone who is actually engaging in third-party transactions? It's difficult to be able to determine that, but yeah, idea?
It's not even, I don't even think it's easy, like, because you could have like an external thing that's just a friend helping a friend out. And
Yeah.
the system that you just described would absolutely flag that as like a,
Yeah.
bad faith transaction.
I'm wealthy, I'm playing with my best friend, they're just starting for the first time, I want to give them a little bit of a boost, so they're likely to have a better time and want to come play with me more. Banned. Why? I'm just helping a friend, right? That's not something you as a player want to experience. That would drive you away from the game if you were banned for just trying to help a friend. That is a great point. Stepping into the designer's shoes, what do you do about it?
Or don't allow the trading of in-game items, or like at least block premium items to the person who
Sure.
bought them.
That is one possible, that's a lot of games do that. You buy something premium and it's locked to your account. You can't trade anything that you bought for real money.
I mean, I like. If you look at like games that have markets like this, the majority of the majority of the player trades for real money tend to come from like centralized environments, websites that are dedicated to
Mhm.
like facilitating these transactions.
Yes.
So to some degree, you can just say, we don't care about two individual people agreeing, like an individual person agreeing to buy an item for real money from another person. That's such a small fraction of the problem that we just don't care about that. We're just going to focus on looking for and DMCAing all of these sites, and then we can suppress the majority of the real world trading that way.
How do you know that someone, because they don't, in these third-party sites, they don't link anything about the game to that site. So yes, this game could ban that site, but how do you know who's hired by that site to farm for items and sell them? How do you know, let's say I message someone in a third-party site, tell them my in-game name, they invite me to a party, I go engage in that trade. How do we know? What if it's an isolated incident, but then a random account starts spamming links to this site in a global chat in your live service game? And every time that account is banned, since that is not the account with the value on it, they just make a new account. Continue to spam in global chat. That one's banned, continue to make a new account. And they never do that spamming with any of the accounts that hold the actual value. They're just throwaway accounts that can be banned anytime for that. But it makes the entire game's public aware of this third-party real money trading site.
Honeypot?
What was that? Sorry?
Honeypot? I think.
Honeypot? Yeah.
Try to, or, have someone within the company who goes and sets those up themselves. And, tries
Yeah.
to, and if people are willing to do it, then they get it.
Not really scale.
And then one player says, hey, this site scammed me and banned me for engaging with this. It's probably run by the developers. And then you need a new honeypot.
Putting up new sites.
Yeah.
Or I guess, or like, the sites that already exist have someone
sites.
go on there.
And engage from from the consumer's perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can figure out which accounts invite you, but those are just, yeah, you can try to do that for everyone, but that site is still hiring outside players. So you have to learn who the owners of the site are, and they're not engaged with any of this.
If you can't beat them, join them, just make your own site and kind of direct everyone to do other stuff on that, and then you get ad revenue and everything.
You could do it that way. But if the design goal is not to allow real money transactions in your game, because that would affect the economy in a way that you don't want to design for, it isn't your vision. There's no answer to this yet. It is an open question. Different companies are handling this in different ways, but it's something as a designer you need to be very aware of as you design your game, because people will try to circumvent whatever rules you have in place to try to profit. It's the equivalent of the board game and trying to make profit off of your friends and what's supposed to be a casual get together. Now it's a money-making exchange. It's the same thing.
You guys play competitive games casually with each other?
Yeah,
That's a good way to discourage, the use of set boards or exchanges.
Mhm.
Why, you try and go buy it for some guy who wants to just get a game, and I don't have to pay somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not a perfect solution, but it saves. us
Does
more
something.
time. It saves more time and resources than having to go smoothing,
Yeah,
money potting and finding these sites and taking them down.
Yeah. Fair. So you can try to catch people and ban those who you catch, but then you have to worry about, am I banning people who didn't do anything or helping their friends? So minimizing false positives to say those who we catch cheating, we want them to be cheating as much as possible. So now if that's the case, then you need to hire customer support to be able to handle those appeals from people who believe that they weren't engaging in anything against your terms of service. If you ban someone who's not doing that, it's going to be bad reputation for your game. They should at least be able to reach out to customer support. Think about what kind of evidence is needed to prove that one was not engaging in this, or what kind of evidence would you need that someone was engaging in this to ban them in the first place? How could you separate those to the best of your ability and minimize the false accusations? So another thing you can do, allow it, but fail to support it. What that means is if players agree to some exchange of real money, you can't come to any official support from the game's developers or customer support because it is not our task to facilitate the exchange of real money for goods. That is, the risk for that is all on you, the player base. And if that's the case, then maybe fewer and fewer players are willing to send money to some company who they don't know to facilitate some kind of trade that they're just assuming is going to happen. Yeah.
I recently read an article that bank tellers spend most of the time trying to stop old people from taking out all their money and sending it somewhere. So
Yeah.
it's something that it's just always gonna persist.
Yeah. So just don't officially support it. Put it in your terms of service, and then don't even try to catch people doing it. But then when someone comes crying to you and says, "My money was stolen, my money was stolen," you could also just allow and support it. That says, we do allow the exchange for real money, and you can come to our customer support. And usually then you are the one with the site. So if you allow it and support it, there is a game-related site where you can facilitate this, but then you make sure that it's secure, that the funds are available before you disperse the items. You have to figure out all of the associated, what are all the errors that could go wrong with a particular payment before that happens, just to make sure that you can exchange goods and services. And of course, you can charge a fee on top of that as well. You could say there's a 50-cent transaction fee every time this happens, and then you pocket that transaction fee. So of course, if player trades are allowed, then we need to be able to prevent lower level characters from buying and using higher level gear. So you could just start the game and buy the best gear in the game. So you have some kind of either level requirement for it or level restrictions on items. You can also, if you want to restrict the trading between only existing players, make there a level 4 floor to engage in trading that says that your character must at least be level 30 before it can engage in a trading market. And that way, when a character, when someone gets banned for engaging in it, they at least have to level a new character to 30 before they can trade again. And that can be a little bit of a deterrent. Although if they're botting that, that's probably not a huge deterrent. You just write a script that levels a character to 30, and then you're not doing it manually. You can, of course, we talked about this, make some items untradeable, especially those that are premium items. If you purchase something for your account, it is locked to your account. Last minute questions on anything related to economic systems. We're going to transition to trading systems next. So we haven't really talked about the support for trading and how to actually go through systems that for player trading. But this is the end of just thinking about the economic bit of trading. All right, we will go do that. So to get behind what trading systems are, we need to first put ourselves in the player's shoes to figure out why might we want to trade? What reasons would players have to want to engage in some trading system? So if games have resources, we learned that each resource has a value to a particular player at a particular moment in time, and that can change based on the amount of that currency or that resource that player has. The desire for a little bit more of that resource drops off as you have more and more of that resource. And whenever this is inherent in your game, where players value a particular resource differently at different points in time. This opens up a mutually beneficial opportunity for these players to exchange some of their goods that they have collected. And it can be mutually beneficial because each player values each resource differently. So player one needs grapes more than cherries, and player two needs cherries more than grapes right now. A one-to-one exchange for that sounds great to both players because each one needs what the other player has more than what they have. Mutually beneficial. So how do players actually agree on trades? So building in a trading system into your game allows for players to find other players for whom there is a mutually beneficial trade. So that's the design way I would think about incorporating any particular trading system, is thinking about, from your players' perspectives, how do they identify who to trade with? So first and foremost, are we allowing for negotiation? Are the players setting those prices, and are those prices manipulable after an exchange has been agreed upon? I want to trade with you. Now, do we start a negotiation or do we immediately accept the trade? So negotiation is something that we want to do. Trades for items. Is there a bartering system of some kind? So can they just straight up exchange items for items? So what's nice about trading systems is, we talked about feedback loops. This actually is a negative feedback loop. What that means is players are actually incentivized to trade with players who are behind them in the curve for the game. I've farmed extra of this particular resource that I don't need as much anymore for this portion in the story. Another character gets to that portion and needs that item. So you don't need it, you just got through that, they need it, they're right there. They have a desire to purchase that from you, and they can take some of the currency or some other item that they've farmed up till that point and trade you for something that you don't need anymore. Helps both players out. Especially in a board game setting where you're directly in competition with this player, if they're so far behind you, an unequal trade is actually still in your benefit. Imagine being in a 3-player game. You're neck and neck, you're player one, you're neck and neck with player two, and player three is very far behind. You can imagine giving them 150% of the value of what they're giving you. And it doesn't matter from your perspective that you're giving them a little bit of a push to catch up, because compared to the player you're in direct competition with, player two, you're getting something that they are not. And that can push you ahead of player two and maximize your chances of winning the game. So players that are farthest ahead have reason to trade with players that are farthest behind, which leads to a catch-up type of system, which means that it's a negative feedback loop. Of course, you can also hold out for a good deal if you have some kind of resource of value and there's players ahead of you. If you farm something that you know is of value to players who are ahead of you in the curve, you can hold out for a really good deal from your perspective. Because from their perspective, they're willing to give you a lot to get you a reasonable chunk of the way caught up in exchange for a small amount of benefit to get ahead of the player that's just ahead of them or just behind them. So the players who are behind in a system where this trading actually has a ton of power and a ton of negotiation, if you can pit player one against player two in terms of who will give me more for this resource that you both need. So in order to trade, players need ownership of what they are trying to trade. So they need to trade something they own for something that they will own after the trade takes place. Gifts, on the other hand, don't necessarily imply that you own the thing ahead of time. So if wealthy players gift a resource to a newer player, this could be just time spent helping them. What's exchanged for this could just be some kind of future benefit. Hey, I want to make friends with you so that when you're a high-level character as well, you remember that I helped you become a high-level character, and you'll let me take more than 50% of what drops when we're both high-level characters. Or any other type of negotiation like that that allows you to exchange something of less value to you now for something in the future that has more value to you. So free-to-play games like to do something similar to this. They allow you to gift items you don't own. So when you log into the game, it'll say, congratulations, you have these items to give away. If you fail to give them away, they dissipate or they go away. It's not something that you take ownership of. It's not something that you have that you can use. It's only usable if you gift it to someone else and then they can use it. So what that means is you're hoping for some kind of, if I give away all of my goods, then maybe I'll be receiving some goods from other people who also gave away the gifts that they received. And there's no downside to not doing it, so you might as well. Of course, it creates opportunities for bartering and negotiation if you can be in communication with the player that you would send it to. I will send you this gift if you, etc. And now the gift that has no value to you has value to them, so you can try to extract a portion of that value back to yourself. All right, direct trades. So this is a player-to-player exchange. So we need to, as a designer, first figure out what can be traded, what can't be traded. We need to figure out if we should be imposing any limits on trade. If there are trading limits, then players have to strategize about when they engage with trade, or they'll place a floor on the value of a trade. Let's say you can only trade 3 times per day. If you're going to engage in a trade, it has to be valuable enough to you to use one of those 3 slots. So you can either limit the number of players you can trade with, something like the active player can only trade during their turn and has to initiate the exchange. Limit the number of trades per turn or total throughout the game. Of course, if you do this, you may find that your game takes longer, but maybe that's okay. That it's something that you should be aware of. If you limit the free market, then you are placing limitations on a player getting everything that they need as fast as they can to finish the game as quickly as they can. Anything for preventing exploitation? So what do you add to make sure that the rules that you implement in your game are actually being followed? How many accounts can one player have? How are you going to crack down on a player who is making hundreds and hundreds of accounts with throwaway emails? If you're not familiar with Gorilla Mail, it's just the 10-minute mail site, allows you to make an email account, use it for something, and then it's deleted 10 minutes later. But it's a real email that you can go get a code from or something sent to you, and then you have 10 minutes, and then it's gone. But it's not a permanent email. It doesn't get filled up with junk. So that means that a player could make an account with that mail, and you can continue to do that hundreds of times. So if players are allowed to have more than one account, can you trade between accounts that you own? If so, great. If not, how are you going to enforce that? There's the concept of trade holds. So do you want to write some kind of algorithm that looks at a trade before it is authorized to figure out, is this a valid trade, yes or no? You could try to parse the IP addresses of where the trade is happening. Is going back to the same IP? Does someone just have 2 different versions of the game open from the same IP? How do we know? How can we catch that?
Then how do you know it's not 2 different people in the same house playing together?
Right. Yeah, there are downsides to just about everything from that. You would hope that they have a different static IP, even if it's within the same household, but it might be similar. But if they're connected to Wi-Fi, that's a little bit trickier. So the goal of all of this is to minimize the effect of scammers on your economy. And the other issue is kingmaking, which means that someone who knows they are not going to win the game can start to give away their resources and start to determine who is going to win the game because of just this last minute transaction before I bow out of the game or lose the game. So that is annoying from any player's perspective when your opponent gets a bunch of free resources that they didn't earn. And that's the reason they won the game. That doesn't feel good. So you can try to change the mechanics of direct trades to prevent that from being a viable option in your game, but it's something, again, you should be aware of. Should we allow players to gift another player a victory when they're not winning? All right, we'll come back and finish this off, I guess, next Monday. Remember that tomorrow is a review period, so come with any questions, confusions, examples that you'd like me to come up with for anything from the study guide. And we'll take an exam on Friday. You want to keep it earlier in the week? That is week's gone by fast, right?
Tomorrow, we'll be able to join via Zoom.
Could be, because we won't be in here. Every other room that I've been in has had no problems with Zoom. Today is the first time, even in here, that I've had.
Okay, all right, because I probably won't be here tomorrow.
Yeah, you should be able to join via Zoom. If not, I'll do everything I can to record it and post it immediately afterwards. If something happens. Yeah.
I might make some edits to my homework. Yeah, like, oh, we haven't gone over any of those stuff. We should move that.